Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're kicking off a four-part series exploring this book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. It's pretty legendary in the urban planning world, published back in 1961, but still super relevant, especially for anyone studying or working in urban planning.
Yeah, it's amazing how much her work still resonates today. She really was ahead of her time in challenging all those conventional ideas about how cities should be designed and managed.
For sure. And for this first deep dive, we're going to zero in on something that might seem super basic, but it's actually like crazy important. We're talking sidewalks. Jacobs argues that sidewalks are way more than just places to walk. They're like the arteries of a city,
Yeah,
pumping life and energy into every single block.
exactly. And she really goes after those utopian planning ideas that were all the rage in the mid-20th century, the whole garden city and radiant city thing. She argued that these models, especially because they emphasize separating everything into neat little zones, often ended up creating spaces that felt isolated and artificial and even unsafe.
Yeah, and I love how she uses that analogy of the high-rise housing projects
Hmm.
with their long, empty corridors. She's basically like, these are streets, right?
Right.
But they're super vulnerable to crime because no one's watching them.
Right. And that's where her famous eyes on the street concept comes in. It's not about having a cop on every corner. It's about having just the constant presence of people going about their daily lives, shopkeepers, residents, even the folks who just like to hang out on their stoops. It creates a kind of natural surveillance system that deters crime.
Have you ever walked down like a deserted street or through an empty parking lot, like late at night? You probably felt a little uneasy, right? It's because those eyes on the street were missing.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And that's where sidewalks come in. Jacobs argues that lively, bustling sidewalks, those are the key to creating that sense of safety and community. She paints this awesome picture of a sidewalk ballet, all these seemingly random encounters and interactions that just add up to a vibrant public life.
Like that scene that she describes on Hudson Street with the kids playing and shopkeepers chatting with customers, people walking their dogs, all this activity happening just right out in the open. It creates this energy, right, that draws people in, makes them feel connected to their neighborhood.
For sure, for sure. And remember, she's writing this in the 1960s when, like, a lot of people were seriously worried about crime in cities. Her argument was that we shouldn't be trying to isolate people or move kids off the streets, and into parks and playgrounds. Instead, we should be encouraging more activity and interaction on sidewalks because that's what creates a truly safe and vibrant environment.
It's like she's saying, don't be afraid of the street, embrace it. And that's a powerful message, especially for those urban planners who are trying to design cities that are both safe and livable. But, but how do you actually create those kinds of vibrant sidewalks? Jacobs has some specific ideas about that, right?
Oh, she does. She does. And this is where she starts to really challenge conventional planning wisdom. She argues that those well-intentioned efforts to, clean up cities by separating all the different functions, like putting all the housing in one area, all the businesses in another, all the parks somewhere else entirely, it can actually backfire. It creates these sterile, isolated spaces that
So it's not just about having a sidewalk. It's about what's happening on that sidewalk and around it. It's about having that mix of uses, right? Shops, residences, maybe even a little light industry, something to bring people out at different times of day and create that constant buzz of activity.
Exactly. And she highlights how even those casual interactions, like just a quick chat with the local barista or a nod to a neighbor walking by, those actually contribute to this feeling of public trust. And it's not something that you can force or manufacture. It just grows organically from those everyday encounters
Yeah.
on the sidewalk.
Like the saying, it takes a village.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And a city, especially its neighborhoods, those need to function like a village. You need those informal networks of trust and shared responsibility, that feeling that, people are looking out for each other. And that's not something that can be created through some like top-down planning.
Yeah.
It emerges from the bottom up, from the spontaneous interactions on the street.
And that's where those public characters come in, right?
Yeah.
Jacobs talks about those folks who might not have official roles, but they're kind of like the unofficial guardians of a neighborhood.
Yeah. Like the shopkeepers, the bartenders, there's people who are always out and about. They know everybody. And everybody knows them. They become these anchors of stability and sources of information. If something's out of place, they're the ones who will notice. They're the ones who will say something.
Right. They're like the human eyes on the street. which you just can't replicate with security cameras or police patrols. It's about having that human connection, that sense of shared ownership of a space. But I'm curious, doesn't Jacobs also talk about the importance of having some separation between public and private life? It can't be all eyes on the street all the time.
For sure. She does. She does. She emphasizes the importance of having a clear line between public and private life. It's like you want people to feel connected to their community, but you don't want them to feel like they're constantly being watched or judged, you know?
So it's about finding that sweet spot where people feel comfortable engaging with their neighbors, but they also have the space to be themselves and maintain their privacy. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially in those dense urban environments where people are just living in close proximity to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jacobs argues that those planned communities that try to force a sense of like togetherness, they can actually backfire. People end up feeling suffocated by that lack of privacy. Yeah. And they withdraw into themselves. It's about striking that balance between, connection and autonomy.
It's like she's saying, good fences make good neighbors. But in a city, those fences are more like invisible lines of social etiquette. And it's those subtle cues and unspoken understandings that allow people to kind of navigate those complex social dynamics of urban life.
That's a great way to put it. It's something that's often overlooked in traditional planning, which tends to focus on the physical design of spaces rather than the social dynamics that unfold within them.
It's like those planners are forgetting that cities are made up of people, not just buildings and streets. It's those human interactions, those sidewalk ballets that give a city its character, its soul.
Right. Speaking of those social dynamics, let's zoom out a bit and think about those larger city neighborhoods and districts that Jacobs talks about. She argues that they play a crucial role in shaping a city's overall health and vitality.
So we're moving beyond just the individual streets and sidewalks now. I'm thinking about how those smaller units fit into that larger urban fabric.
Exactly, exactly. And Jacobs argues that those districts need to be strong enough to advocate for their own needs, to fight City Hall when necessary. They can't be just these passive recipients of top-down planning decisions.
They need to have some teeth,
Yeah.
some power to shape their own destinies.
Right. Jacobs contrasts those strong districts with the limitations of smaller, more isolated neighborhoods that often lack the political clout, to influence those citywide decisions. She's like, if you want to get things done in a city, you need to have those bigger units that can effectively organize and mobilize.
Strength in numbers, but those numbers need to be organized and focused. And that's where those hop-skip relationships come in, right? Those connections that link people from different parts of a district and build those bridges across social and economic divides.
Exactly. And those relationships are often informal. They emerge organically from those everyday interactions and shared experiences. It's like that friend of a friend who knows a guy who can help you with that thing you need to get done.
Like those 6 degrees of separation, but on a neighborhood level. Mm-hmm. And those connections can be incredibly powerful, especially when it comes to tackling those complex urban challenges that require collaboration across different sectors and communities.
Absolutely. And that's something that's often missing in those top-down planning approaches that try to impose solutions from above. Jacobs argues that real solutions, they need to come from the bottom up, from those people who are actually living and working in the neighborhoods that are being affected.
It's about tapping into that local knowledge, that lived experience, that understanding of how things actually work on the ground. It makes so much sense. But how do you actually cultivate those hop-skip relationships and empower those local communities? Does Jacobs offer any like concrete suggestions?
She does. And this is where her ideas about diversity come in. She argues that one of the key ingredients for a strong, vibrant city is having a mix of people from different backgrounds, skills and perspectives.
Okay, so we're shifting gears a bit now, moving from those social dynamics of sidewalks and districts to the larger question of diversity and how it shapes a city.
Exactly. And Jacobs challenges the notion that you can create diversity simply by, plopping down a mix of different building types in a particular area. She's like, that's not real diversity. That's just architectural window dressing.
Like those mixed income housing developments where you have like a few affordable units sprinkled in among the luxury apartments. Looks diverse on paper, but does it actually create those meaningful interactions and connections that Jacobs is talking about?
That's a great question. And Jacobs would argue that it's not enough to just have different types of housing next to each other. You need to have those mixed primary uses that bring people to a particular area at different times of day and for different reasons.
So it's not just about where people live, it's about how they use the space around them.
Yeah. Think about a truly vibrant city neighborhood. You might have offices and shops that draw people in during the day. But then you also have residences and restaurants that keep things lively in the evening. And maybe you have some cultural institutions, a theater, a museum, a music venue that attract people, on the weekends or for special events.
So it's about creating this like 2047 kind of energy, making sure the neighborhood doesn't just shut down after business hours or on the weekends. I see how that would be good for both businesses and residents. It creates that sense of safety and vibrancy. That benefits everyone.
For sure. And that's one of the key conditions that Jacobs identifies for generating this kind of vibrant urban diversity, having those mixed primary uses that create this constant flow of people and activity throughout the day and night.
So mixed-use development isn't just some trendy planning buzzword. It's actually a fundamental principle for creating healthy, thriving cities.
According to Jacobs, absolutely. And she doesn't stop there. She goes on to identify 3 other conditions that are essential for fostering this kind of vibrant urban ecosystem.
Okay, I'm hooked. What are the other 3? This is fascinating.
Well, the second condition she emphasizes is the importance of short blocks.
Short blocks, you mean like literally the length of the streets?
Yeah.
Between intersections?
Yeah, that's right. Now, this might seem like a small detail, but Jacobs argues that shorter blocks actually have a huge impact on the way people experience a city.
Because they encourage more walking and pedestrian traffic.
Yeah, exactly. Short blocks make it easier
Yeah.
and more enjoyable. To navigate a neighborhood on foot, you can quickly hop from one street to the next. You're more likely to just stumble upon interesting shops and businesses, and you're more likely to encounter other people along the way.
It's like that saying, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But in a city, the most interesting route is often the one that meanders a bit, takes you off the beaten path.
Exactly, and that's what short blocks do. They create those opportunities for serendipitous encounters and unexpected discoveries. They make the city feel more like a vibrant, interconnected network rather than a series of isolated cul-de-sacs.
So it's not just about making it easier to get from point A to point B. It's about creating a more engaging and stimulating urban experience.
Exactly. And here's something that might surprise you. Jacobs actually argues that those long, monotonous blocks that you find in some cities, those can actually contribute to a feeling of isolation and insecurity.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, think about it. If you're walking down a long block with no intersections, you have fewer options for changing direction or ducking into a shop if you feel uncomfortable. And if something were to happen, there are fewer people around to see it or offer assistance.
It's like you're trapped in this long, narrow corridor with limited visibility and escape routes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Jacobs is such a big advocate for shorter blocks. They break up those long stretches of street, create more points of access and visibility, and generally make the city feel more permeable and welcoming to pedestrians.
I'm starting to see how those seemingly minor details of urban design can have this huge impact on the way people experience a city. It's not just about, aesthetics. It's about creating an environment that feels safe, inviting, and conducive to those spontaneous interactions that Jacob is always talking about.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third condition that she identifies, the need for buildings of varying ages and conditions.
Okay, this one seems a bit counterintuitive. Don't you usually want to just replace those old rundown buildings with shiny new ones? I mean, who wants to live next to a crumbling facade or a boarded up storefront?
I know, right? That's the conventional wisdom. But Jacobs actually argues that older buildings often serve a vital function in a city. She's like, don't underestimate the power of a little bit of grit and patina.
So she's not advocating for urban decay, but she is saying that we shouldn't be so quick to demolish everything that's old.
Yeah.
Or slightly out of fashion.
Yeah, exactly. And she has some very compelling reasons for this. First, she points out that older buildings tend to be more affordable. Yeah. Which allows for a greater diversity of residents and businesses.
So it's about creating that economic mix that we were talking about earlier, making sure that a neighborhood isn't just catering to the wealthy elite.
Exactly. older buildings often provide those affordable spaces that, artists, entrepreneurs, young families, they need those to get a foothold in a city, and that's what gives a neighborhood its character, its soul, that mix of people from different backgrounds and income levels.
Variety is the spice of life. And in a city, that variety often comes from those older buildings that have been like repurposed and reimagined over time.
Right. And here's another reason why she loves older buildings. They often have those unique architectural features that add visual interest and character to a neighborhood. Think about those ornate cornices, those wrought iron balconies, those quirky little storefronts that you just don't find in those cookie cutter modern developments.
It's about preserving that sense of history, that sense of place that makes a city, feel unique and authentic. It's what sets it apart from those generic suburbs or those planned communities that all start to look the same after a while.
Right. And here's a third reason why older buildings are so important. They often house those small independent businesses that can't afford the high rents of newer developments.
So it's about supporting those mom and pop shops, those quirky little boutiques, those local restaurants that give a neighborhood its flavor and personality.
Exactly. And those businesses often become those public characters that we were talking about earlier. They're the ones who know their customers by name, who are invested in the community, who create that sense of local pride and identity.
Creating a sense of place, a sense of belonging, a sense that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And I can see how those older buildings with their history and their imperfections can actually contribute to that.
For sure. Jacobs argues that trying to create this perfectly uniform modern city, it stifles the kind of organic growth and diversity that makes cities thrive. She's a big advocate for embracing the messiness and imperfections that come with having a mix of old and new.
It's like she's saying, don't be afraid of a little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
That's where the magic happens.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads us to the fourth and final condition that Jacobs identifies as being essential for creating vibrant, diverse cities: the need for concentration.
Concentration. You mean having a lot of people and activities packed into a relatively small area.
Yeah, exactly. Now this might seem counterintuitive, especially in a time when so many people are fleeing cities, for the perceived peace and quiet of the suburbs.
But Jacobs is basically saying, bring on the crowds.
In a way, yeah. She argues that a certain level of density is essential for creating that dynamic, diverse environment that she advocates for. It's that concentration of people and activities that supports a wide range of businesses, from the everyday essentials like grocery stores and laundromats to those more specialized shops and cultural institutions that add to the richness and vibrancy of a city.
So it's about creating that critical mass that makes all sorts of interesting things possible. Like, think about those bustling city neighborhoods where you can find everything you need within a few blocks. Shops, restaurants, theaters, parks, all within walking distance.
Exactly. And it's not just about, convenience. It's also about those chance encounters and unexpected connections that happen when you have lots of people from different backgrounds, and walks of life interacting in a shared space. It's that serendipity that sparks new ideas, collaborations and innovations.
Like the saying, the more the merrier. But in a city, it's also the more the merrier, the more creative and dynamic the city becomes.
That's a great way to put it. And it challenges those notions of urban sprawl and suburban isolation that have become so prevalent in recent decades. Jacobs argues that true urban vitality comes from that concentration of people and activities, from that density that creates a sense of energy and possibility.
It's like she's saying, if you want a boring, predictable life, move to the suburbs. But if you want to be stimulated, challenged, and inspired, come to the city.
And embrace the crowds.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing cities in a whole new light. But this is just the beginning of our exploration of Jane Jacobs's, groundbreaking work.
Picking up where we left off, Jacobs doesn't just champion diversity. She really dives into those myths that often trip up city planners. It's like she's saying, hey, if you want a diverse city, you got to understand what actually works.
Okay, so you're saying there are these common misconceptions.
Yeah.
About how to create diverse cities. Like what? Give us an example.
Well, one big one she tackles is this idea that you can just plop down a mix of different building types in an area and call it a day. Like, okay, we got a high-rise apartment, a row of townhouses, a couple shops, boom, diversity achieved. But Jacobs argues that's not how it works.
It's like, thinking you can make a delicious soup by just throwing a bunch of random ingredients into a pot.
All right.
You need the right combination, the right balance of flavors.
Exactly. True diversity comes from that interplay of those different uses, not just the physical proximity. It's about how they function and interact to create that dynamic, interconnected system.
So it's not enough to just have different things next to each other. It's about how they actually work together to create that vibrant energy that makes a city, hum.
Precisely. And another myth she tackles is this belief that low status uses, like cheap housing or small independent businesses, those inevitably drive out the higher status stuff, like fancy apartments or big chain stores.
So it's like that broken windows theory, right? The idea that if you let one thing slide, the whole neighborhood goes downhill. But I bet Jacobs has a different take.
Oh, you bet she does. She argues that those low status uses can actually enhance a neighborhood's vitality. Think about it, they attract a wider range of people. They add to the street life, and they often become those beloved local spots that give a neighborhood its unique character.
So it's not about trying to create some perfectly homogeneous upscale environment. It's about embracing that mix, that grit, that diversity that makes a city interesting and dynamic.
Right. It's about understanding that those so-called low-status uses, they actually play a vital role in the urban ecosystem. And then there's this idea that we can plan for diversity by creating these self-contained, inward-facing neighborhoods, like those planned communities with their own parks and shopping centers and community centers, all neatly contained within a defined boundary.
Those little bubbles where you theoretically never have to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see the appeal, but I bet Jacobs has some reservations.
Oh, she definitely does. She definitely does. Jacobs argues that those self-contained enclaves, they actually end up limiting choices and opportunities for the residents. They create artificial barriers between different parts of the city, and they prevent that natural, cross-pollination of ideas and cultures and economic activities that make cities thrive.
Yeah, it's like building walls instead of bridges. You're cutting off those vital connections that allow a city to function as a whole.
Exactly. And she reminds us that cities are at their best when they're seen as networks of overlapping neighborhoods and districts, each with its own, personality, but all interconnected and contributing to that larger urban fabric.
Like a beautiful tapestry woven together from all these different threads. And it's that interplay of colors and textures that makes the whole thing so vibrant and fascinating.
Right. Now, remember how we talked about those district level neighborhoods being important for self-governance? Jacobs, she emphasizes that those districts need to be big enough to have a voice in city politics, but not so big that they lose that sense of, local connection.
Finding that sweet spot, not too small, not too big, but just right to have both clout and community, that sounds like a real challenge.
It is. But Jacobs, she offers some insights into how successful districts tend to evolve. They often emerge organically as people with shared interests and concerns, they start connecting and collaborating.
So it's not about drawing lines on a map. It's about those hop-skip relationships that we talked about earlier, those informal networks that link people together.
Exactly. And she points out that you need people who are, rooted in their local communities, but also have connections to those citywide networks of power and influence.
Like those local ambassadors.
Yeah.
Who can translate needs and aspirations of their neighborhoods to the powers that be.
Precisely. And here's another important point. Jacobs, she challenges this notion that strained neighborhoods need a homogenous population, like those ethnically cohesive communities that some people hold up as models of successful self-governance.
But Jacobs is saying that diversity is actually the key to strength.
That's right. She argues that true neighborhood strength comes from having people with a range of backgrounds and skills and perspectives.
Yeah, it makes sense when you think about how complex and ever-changing cities are. You need all those different voices and ideas to solve problems and adapt to those changes.
And she points out that those ethnically homogenous neighborhoods that do thrive, they often have another key ingredient, a core group of residents who are deeply invested in their community. It's that commitment
Yeah.
and willingness to put in the effort. That truly makes a neighborhood successful.
So it's not about, where you come from. It's about how much you care about the place you live. That's really inspiring. It means that anyone, regardless of, their background, can contribute to building a strong, vibrant neighborhood.
Exactly. And she also talks about the importance of having a certain level of stability within a neighborhood.
You mean having a core group of residents who stay put,
Yeah.
even as, newcomers arrive and others move on. But isn't that kind of at odds with that fluidity
Totally.
and mobility that they characterize, city life?
It might seem that way, but Jacobs argues that the constant churn of city life actually creates opportunities for people to find their niche, to connect with others who share their interests and to put down roots in a place that feels like home.
So it's not about trying to freeze a neighborhood in time. It's
Yeah.
about creating an environment that allows for both change and continuity. It's about finding that balance between, welcoming newcomers and honoring that history and character. That makes a neighborhood special.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads us to one of Jacobs's most thought-provoking arguments. She says that the very fluidity and mobility
Yeah.
of city life can actually contribute to neighborhood stability.
Wait, how does that work? It seems counterintuitive.
I know, right? It might seem that way at first, but think about it. When people are constantly coming and going, it creates opportunities for others to move in, to discover the neighborhood, to fall in love with it, and decide to stay. It's like this constant replenishing of energy and ideas.
So it's not about trying to create some static utopia.
Mm.
It's about embracing the dynamism, the ever-changing nature of cities.
Exactly. And she emphasizes that we can't design successful cities by just imposing our ideas from the top down. We need to understand those complex organic processes that drive city life.
It's about working with the grain of a city, not against it. And that requires a deep understanding of how people actually use and experience urban spaces.
Precisely. And that's what makes Jacobs's work so relevant for urban planners today. She's not just giving us a set of rules. She's giving us a framework for understanding
Yeah.
how cities work.
Like she's saying, don't just copy what you see in other cities. Look around you, observe, listen, and figure out what makes your city unique.
And then use those observations to design and manage the city in a way that supports its natural vitality and resilience.
Yeah. This is making me think about those cities that try to replicate those successful models they see elsewhere. Like trying to build their own version of Times Square or the Champs-Élysées, but it never quite works, does it?
Right, because they're trying to force something that's not organic, that doesn't grow naturally from the city's own history and culture.
It's like trying to transplant a tree from one climate to another. It might survive for a while, but it'll never truly thrive.
Exactly, and that's why Jacobs is such a strong advocate for those bottom-up approaches to urban planning. She believes that real solutions they need to come from the people who are actually living and working in the neighborhoods that are being affected.
Yeah, it's about empowering those local communities to shape their own destinies, to create the kinds of spaces that they want to live in.
And that's one of the most inspiring things about Jacobs's work. It's a call to action. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping our cities.
So what does all this mean for our listeners? Whether you're a student of urban planning or just someone who loves cities, Jacobs's insights can help us understand how these complex systems work.
And they can inspire us to think critically about how we can make our own cities more livable, more equitable, more vibrant.
And that's what this deep dive is all about, encouraging you to look at your city with fresh eyes, to see the potential in those everyday spaces and to get involved in shaping the future of your community.
And remember, it all starts with those sidewalks. Get out there. Explore your neighborhood. Strike up a conversation with your local shopkeeper and see what you
Yeah.
discover.
This is just the beginning of our exploration of Jane Jacobs' incredible book. So we've
Yeah.
covered so much already, from Eyes on the Street to the power of those short blocks. But I'm really curious to see how these ideas translate into, real world urban planning. Has anyone actually put Jacobs's theories into practice?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Her work has been incredibly influential, both in the US and internationally. There are tons of examples of cities that have like adopted her principles to revitalize neighborhoods, improve safety, create more livable urban environments.
Give us some specific. I'm dying to hear about some real world success stories.
Okay, well, one great example is the revitalization of Bryant Park in New York City. Back in the 1970s, it was basically a no-go zone, like a haven for crime and drug activity. But in the 1980s, the city decided to completely redesign the park using Jacobs's principles.
So what did they do? Did they just like add more benches and flowers?
Oh, they did way more than that. They really focused on creating that sense of eyes on the street that Jacobs talks about. They
Yeah.
they opened up the park by removing those dense shrubs that had provided cover for illicit activities. They added a bunch of like movable chairs and tables
Right.
so people could personalize their space, and they also brought in a lot of programming, concerts, food vendors, even a reading room to attract people at different times of day.
So they basically turned it into a destination, right?
Huh.
A place where people wanted to be. It's like they activated the space
Yeah.
with all those different uses and activities that Jacobs, championed.
Exactly. And the results were dramatic. Crime rates plummeted. People started, using the park again, and it became a real hub of community life. And it's all thanks to those simple yet powerful principles that Jacobs outlined in her book.
Okay. That's this one part. But what about on a larger scale? Has
Sure.
has any city really embraced Jacobs's vision for a whole neighborhood or district?
Well, we'll take a look at the South End neighborhood in Boston. It's a great example of how Jacobs's ideas can be applied to revitalize a historic district without sacrificing its unique character, or displacing its longtime residents.
Yeah, and I know the South End. It's beautiful, all those Victorian brownstones and tree-lined streets. But it wasn't always a desirable place to live, right?
No, in the mid 20th century, the South End was actually slated for demolition under those urban renewal programs that Jacob so fiercely criticized. The idea was to like bulldoze all those historic buildings and replace them with modern high rises.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking to think about all that history
Yeah,
and architectural beauty just being lost.
I know, right? But luckily, a group of residents and activists, they fought back. They recognized the value of those older buildings, the charm of the neighborhoods, mixed use streets, and the importance of preserving its social fabric.
So they basically took Jacob's book as their guide, and they said we can do better than this top-down approach.
Exactly. They lobbied the city to abandon the demolition plans, and instead they focused on rehabilitating those historic structures. They also worked to maintain that mix of uses that Jacobs advocated for: residential, commercial, and even some light industrial to create a diverse and vibrant neighborhood economy.
And did it work? Is the South End still a thriving neighborhood today?
It absolutely is. It's now one of Boston's most desirable neighborhoods, known for its beautiful architecture, its diverse population, and its lively street life. And it's a testament to the power of Jacobs's ideas to create cities that are both beautiful and functional,
Yeah.
historic and modern, and most importantly, people centered.
Okay. So we've seen how Jacobs's ideas have been applied in New York and Boston. But what about other cities around the world? Has her work had, an international impact?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Her ideas have resonated with urban planners and activists all over the globe. One particularly inspiring example is the city of Medellin, Colombia. Back in the 1990s, Medellin was notorious for its drug violence and poverty. But the city embarked on this really ambitious program of urban renewal that drew heavily on Jacobs' principles.
Wow. I've heard about Medellín's transformation. It's been hailed as a model for other cities that are struggling with crime and inequality. But how did they actually use Jacobs's ideas?
Well, one of the key things they did was they invested in public transportation, particularly a cable car system that connected those poorest neighborhoods in the hills to the city center.
That sounds amazing. Providing access to jobs and education and opportunities for those who are previously isolated. That's such a powerful way to use infrastructure to address those social and economic disparities.
Exactly. And they also focused on improving public spaces, creating, parks and libraries and cultural centers in those marginalized neighborhoods. They understood that creating those welcoming and vibrant public spaces was crucial for fostering a sense of community and reducing crime.
So they basically took Jacobs's ideas about eyes on the street
Yeah.
and applied them to a whole city. They created those spaces where people could gather and interact and build those social networks that are so essential for a healthy urban environment.
Precisely. And the results have been remarkable. Medellin has seen a dramatic reduction in crime rates, a surge in civic engagement and a renewed sense of pride and optimism. And it's all thanks to those visionary leaders who recognize the power of Jacobs's ideas to transform not just a city's physical landscape, but its social and economic fabric as well.
These stories are so inspiring. They really show that Jacobs's ideas aren't just some abstract theory. They're a practical blueprint
Yes.
for creating cities that are more equitable, more sustainable, and more joyful to live in.
Exactly. And what's so exciting is that her work is still relevant today.
Yeah.
It's a call to action for all of us, students, planners, citizens, to think critically about how we can create those vibrant, diverse, and human-centered cities that she so eloquently envisioned.
I love that. It's like she's given us this amazing toolbox filled with all these powerful ideas and strategies, and it's up to us to figure out how to use those tools to build the cities of the future.
Right. So what are you waiting for? Pick up a copy of The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Get inspired and get involved. Because as Jacobs reminds us, the power to shape our cities, it lies not just in the hands of experts, but in the hands of all of us who call these urban spaces home.
That's such a perfect note to end on. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining us on this deep dive into Jane Jacobs's groundbreaking work, and keep those eyes on the street open, and keep thinking about how we can all contribute to building better cities for everyone.